did was simply smiling, serving, loving every kid that walks through the building, and knowing that some of them might be mine, some of them I may have the opportunity to coach or teach, but also knowing that the majority aren't. And you know, you look at 5, chapter 14, you're the light of the world. A city, a city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand. And it gives light for all who are in the house. In the same way, you let your light shine before men, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. FCA is the only thing that allows that to take place in the public school setting in this county. And I can tell you, before Coach V took over the county, there was no one else. Coach Weatherby was spread thin. And because of the vision and because of the diligence of men and women like yourselves, of FCA boards, of benefactors, of those who were willing to give and kind of stand in the gap, they were able to bring in Coach V. And you talk about divine appointments. We had a player pass away very unexpectedly when I first took over at Riverdale. And you talk about blessed are those who are persecuted. And I was, right out the gate. People said and did awful things, came after my job, questioned my integrity, called everything that I do into question. And in a time of need, the person who stood in the gap for our program, who stood in the gap for me and has ever since, was Coach V. We had a team meeting on a Wednesday morning right before we went to FCA camp. We were already signed up to go as a team. The young man had just passed away. We had other plans that day. But rather than going through with our plans, we felt it was important to meet as a family and just talk. And Coach V, out of nowhere, the day before said, "Hey, brother, just want you to know I'm praying for you if you need anything." And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do. Tomorrow we're going to be meeting, and we'll have another couple of pastors there. I would love to have you there." And he was, and he's been there ever since. And again, the amount of appreciation I have for him, amount of appreciation I have for FCA, the amount of appreciation I have for individuals in this room who are willing to come together on a Tuesday afternoon when you could be a lot of other places cannot be overstated. I will tell you that myself as a football coach, as a man, I'm changed because of individuals who coached me, who made a difference in my life, who were willing to stand boldly in a public school and proclaim their faith and challenge us to be better men on a daily basis, to respect women, to love others, to serve, to go above and beyond, to have a good name. And so because of all those things, I'm able to do that and hopefully change the next generation and make a difference in the young men that we interact with. And that's why I took the job down here. And I'm just thankful to be standing before you and also to have a group of individuals that are fighting the same fight. So thank you for your time. That being said, I have to get back to school before 1:35, so I'm going to jet.
All right, brother. Thanks, brother.
Love you.
Thank you for coming. Love
Yes,
you,
sir.
pal.
I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yeah, we'll see you in the morning. Hello. Is it working? Okay. So I'm going to just run through a couple of things. I know most of you know me. I'm going to run through a couple of things real quick, just to kind of give some stats and what's going on and get a little bit of a vision of what's happening. Matt shared what's happening at Estero. James, what's happening at Riverdale. I've been, as far as me with FCA, when I was at American High School in Miami, 1985. And I was there, and I was a coach and I was a teacher. But before I ever went to school, before I ever did that, I just want to explain one key thing why I'm in FCA. I have that at the top of my sheet here. When I was in middle school and high school, it was the worst years of my life. Worst years. I was short, chubby, redhead. Didn't go over good in the 80s. Wasn't good. All right? Didn't go over good in the 70s. You know, it was just brutal. And I would go home. I had a stepmom. My mom died when I was 2, and I had a stepmom, and you think home would be a place of refuge. It was not. It was not. She was married to an abusive alcoholic. She ended up divorcing him, and kind of like I just figured, probably by age 14, I figured out that he had beat the love out of her. And so it wasn't a place of refuge. So at age 17, I rededicated my life. I started working in Youth for Christ in Miami and Campus Life. And the main reason I did is because I don't want any kid to go through what I went through and have nobody to go to. And there's a lot of kids that are going through that now. So I wanted to start with that. I didn't want to skip that because that's a very important part of my life. So at age 17, I rededicated my life, and I started with youth ministry. So this is my 44th year that I've been dealing with youth. Some people ask me if I'm being punished or if I did something wrong because you don't have a church. And this is what God has called me to do. He's called me to do it for my life. And so 2 years ago, it'll be 2 years, July 1st, I took over FCA here. But I started as a coach and a teacher in 1985. I taught 11 years, coached 11 years, and I started an FCA club in 1985. It was my first FCA club. And Coach Kramer and I, we started it, and we had over 200 kids. We went up to 300 kids a week. Everybody looking for a place of refuge. Big drug scene then. We got combat pay in the school. We got extra pay because there was so many gangs and things going on. And a lot of and I realized at that point that, you know what? I need to reach more kids. I'm only at one school, so I resigned from teaching and went into full-time youth ministry and getting on the street with FCA and fellowship and young Youth for Christ. And in a short period of time, Orlando left, but I met Orlando as a teenager. He is now, and I knew at that point, boy, that kid was going the wrong direction. God brought us back together a little bit later, and I actually attend his church now. It's neat to see a kid I saw as a 15-year-old who was a thug, okay, and who did all these things to try to prove himself to be something else, and now all he wants to do is prove himself before the Lord. And to see that happening, a lot of times as a youth pastor, you don't get to see that. But now I get to sit under his teaching as a pastor there. And this is actually a church plant from the Summit Church over here. So I wanted to say that before he left, but he's already gone, so forget about him. Let's just go on, right? Okay. So 35 years ago, I started with FCA, the first club, and we had I saw the needs of thousands of others, so I wanted to go and make more of a difference, bigger difference. And so one thing I want to keep you in mind of, and I know Matt touched on this a lot, FCA is not the church. Okay? FCA is not the church. But when we get on campus, we become the church. And one thing, Coach Kramer and I talked about this last week. He actually spoke at our FCA banquet. And the big change in students today is they don't go to church. You hear me? They don't go to church. So how are they going to hear? How are we going to hear? Well, God still has an open door for us, which is Fellowship of Christian Athletes. My sister-in-law, Youth for Christ, she's the director of Dade and Broward County, which is huge. She was doing a banquet this weekend. She was supposed to come and do this kind of part for me here, just to talk about it, because she does a great job. She has a $1.5 million budget, raises it every year. Sunday night, she went to get up and talk and give a little program and give the ask, fell off the stage. When she fell off the stage, the podium fell off the stage at the Marriott, which is a big acrylic podium. Just missed her, could have killed her. And first thing I found out she did, and she broke her wrist. She shattered her wrist. So she's in surgery now, getting that wrist taken care of. But if that podium would have landed, I would have been it. And I texted her and I go, Satan doesn't like what we're doing. He knows what's happening. He knows the impact you're making. She was only in Miami. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, you guys heard that in the news, the shootings? They called her and said, can you come up here? So now she's in 10 Broward schools, Broward County schools. Marjorie Stoneman being one of them. And so she was supposed to come to that. So just keep her in your prayers. She's actually getting a plate put in her wrist right now. But God's still blessed, and her staff took over and did the ask at the banquet. And she didn't text me to tell me that she broke her wrist. She texted to tell me that, I'm sorry, I can't come. I go, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? But that young lady was watching me when I was in Youth for Christ, and I was 20 years old, and she was a little 8-year-old girl, and she wanted to be part of Youth for Christ. And now she's been the director of Youth for Christ in Miami for 19 years. 19 years. Doing a phenomenal job, doing the same thing we do. But she said to remind you, to tell you that Youth for Christ could not get into the schools unless there was an FCA there. Unless there was an FCA there. We are like the last open door in the public schools. In 1 Peter 3:15, it says, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that's within you with what? Gentleness and respect. One thing we always remember is we have free will. The kids have free will. The coaches have free will. We can't force anything on them. There has to be a personal relationship with Christ himself. We just bring the message. And how do we bring the message? We love on them. Coach Delgado, I just loved on him. Went over to see what I could. All of his kids loved on him. Matt just loved on him. Let them do what they can. Matt's loving on all the kids that he can do. And so what we've done is we've just done the best that we can to show them Christ. And if we get the opportunity, we use words. We use words. And so we're always ready to give an answer for the hope. And God has given us a lot of open doors to do that. Let me talk about changes real quick. 35 years later, when I started FCA, the skyrocketing rates of depression, anxiety, cyber addiction, sexting, laced vaping, and suicide, when this should be the best years of their lives. That's why I'm an FCA. If you go on a campus and you see this, it's absolutely amazing. And your kids are surrounded by it. And some of you know your kids have been affected by it. And your grandkids are being affected by it. So I'd like you to just pick this. I call this, on the table there's a bunch of these, and it has boxes on the bottom. It says, I call this our prayer card. This is what's going on. To give you an idea, I talked about this. There's a bunch of them on the table. Pass it around. There's 2 different cards. This one has the boxes on the bottom. So grab that one first. And I call this the prayer card. And that's the stats of what we're doing right now in the schools. As James mentioned, I have 2 key focuses on the public school campuses because I'm one person right now. According to FCA, there should be 10 full-timers in Lee County. I'm one person, I'm one full-time, and I'm doing as much as I can, and I talk to Pat. Pat and I get together every week, and I think every week I ask the Lord, you promised you would never give us more than we can handle. What's going on here? Okay? And I'll get a phone call. I get a phone call from an athletic director. I get a phone call to the guy over all the athletic directors. I want you to speak to all the athletic directors. So I did that last Monday. Got to speak to all the athletic directors. Here's what's happening in FCA. And I gave them these stats. If you look at these stats here, I call this a prayer card. We have camp attendance, the current impact that we're having. We have 52 huddles. We have 24 character coaches. We have 45 youth pastors in a youth pastors network. And we have a couple of those guys here today, which is awesome. But if you look at the bottom of the first row where it says high schools, 16 high schools. We're in 16. On the bottom it says 18. So we're in 16 of the 18. Middle schools, we're in 8 of the 17. And we're in both colleges right now. But look at the number in their high schools. Average is about 1,000 students. Right underneath that, at the very bottom, how many students are there in middle school and high school in Lee County? 41,000. So even though we're there, here's your prayer card. We're just scratching the surface. We're just scratching the surface. And Matt can go on. He can go on here, and he can speak another 30 minutes on one after the other. Mark, who's the youth pastor at the Summit,